19. That's how many times firefighter Lieutenant Allison Russo-Elling, who was eyeing retirement, was stabbed by a madman in an unprovoked attack on Thursday. That horrific footage shows the 61-year-old paramedic overcome by her assailant while grabbing food in New York City. The 34-year-old suspect was allegedly screaming "F you" at his victim before appearing to charge, knife in hand, a pedestrian riding a scooter on the sidewalk nearby. Aside from the obvious horror of this scene, it struck me that no one came to the firefighter's defense even as she lay bleeding out on the sidewalk. It takes a while for a soul brave enough to even check on her. As for the suspect, another Good Samaritan eventually gave chase until the suspect barricaded himself inside his nearby apartment. He was eventually arrested and is now being charged today with murder. I know in situations like this, we want to describe it as being a scene like out of the slums of the third world, but as some commentators have pointed out, those acts of violence usually have some rationale behind them, like, say, robbery. Not to say that justifies anything, but there is something tangibly and viscerally more horrible about a society like ours that produces remorseless killers who are out for blood instead of those who kill in the pursuit of something else. That's an entirely different type of evil. So while criminals, literal criminals, run the streets, pro-abortion terrorists are still getting away with, well, not quite murder, though that is what they're fighting for, but with arson. The CEO of Compass Care, a crisis pregnancy center that had one of its locations burned down in Buffalo, New York in the aftermath of the Dobbs leak this summer, now says the police and the FBI neither will give him back his surveillance footage from that night because they fear it may inspire right-wing violence in response to it. Yeah, right. I suspect their real line of reasoning is more akin to what the January 6th defendants are facing when possible exculpatory surveillance videos from the Capitol are being withheld by government prosecutors from them. However, I guess this level of criminality is no surprise given the type of people running D.C. right now. Just take a listen to our very own House Speaker Nancy Pelosi today.
The fact is that we have a responsibility to secure our border. We also have a responsibility to recognize the importance of newcomers to our nation. Right now, the best thing that we can do for our economy is to have comprehensive immigration reform. We have a shortage of workers in our country, and you see even in Florida, some of the farmers and the growers saying, why are you shipping these immigrants up north? We need them to pick the crops down here.
Nancy, talk about saying the quiet part out loud. Yes, Nancy, those crops won't pick themselves, like those stocks won't trade themselves. That's why it's funny to see Pelosi now supposedly pushing for a bill banning lawmakers from trading stock. Joining us now to discuss all this and more is Gavin, president of the New York Young Republican Club. Thanks for being here tonight, Gavin.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Great. So House Democrats this week introducing the Combating Financial Conflicts of Interest in Government Act. That's a mouthful. They say it's going to stop members of Congress, federal judges, many officers or employees of the legislative branch, members of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve, and more, including their spouses and dependent children, from buying and selling stocks. But do you smell a rat here given Pelosi's scandal-plagued pass on this very issue?
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, it's probably not coming from a genuine place of trying to fight corruption and stop all the rent seeking that goes on in D.C. But at the same time, we should still welcome reforms like this. I think what's been happening in D.C. for many years is you have these elected officials who have become millionaires overnight, trading on insider information that only they are privy to, and obviously not the general public. That's what makes it insider. But also advancing certain policies, directives, and legislation that would benefit their own portfolio. I mean, we saw this on both sides of the aisle. Republicans were doing this prior to COVID. I believe the Republican senators from North Carolina and Georgia, and then obviously Pelosi is known for doing this as well. People have made a living tracking her stock trades, etc. So this is a common sense reform. I definitely welcome it, but I wish it was done for more genuine reasons than probably what in this case is bad PR.
And speak about, how touchy the regime is. As you said, some of those accounts on Twitter and other social media outlets, the ones that will follow Pelosi or, some of these rhinos like Crenshaw and the rest, and some of their stocks and trading, or those of their immediate family members. Those accounts, they get a lot of views. A lot of people like to see and to keep up. And then big tech, always they will, take down the account, they'll suspend it, they'll delete things. So obviously it's very, very touchy in D.C. They don't like having their gravy train being derailed in any way. And I was kind of reading through because I was thinking to myself, what's the angle here? And I saw that this plan, as is currently set forward by Democrats this week, it said that members of Congress and their dependents and spouses would have to divest stocks or place them in qualified blind trust. But then it says, or they could pay a penalty of $1,000. And do you think that might be the catch? Because if you're making a couple million, a cool million, off of some, this buying and selling, then what's $1,000 in penalty?
No, this is a very good point. Should figure that there was always going to be something in the fine print that gives them a way out, and that this was largely just a PR move to satisfy elements on both the right and the left that are calling for reforms. So, I mean, I would make it very clear that we should have a ban on stock trading for elected officials, but it should be a real ban, not simply something that says it's a ban, but you have caveats, you have carve-outs, and you have ways through loopholes to get around the rules put in place. I mean, that just seems very typical of Washington, and it's very cynical of them, to put it mildly. But I think the more we can get our politicians the money out of our politics, out of our electoral system, the more we can disincentivize rent seeking, and we can force our elected officials to return to their roots as being representatives of the people and representing the wills of their constituents, the better our republic is going to be for it. Right now, they are answering the needs of the donor base. They are answering the needs of their own personal stock portfolios, but rarely, if ever, the needs of their constituents. So any legitimate move to reform the system, this system, and move us in the right direction will be welcomed. It looks, based on what you just told me, that this piece of legislation is more for show and would actually muddy the waters further. So in that case, we should definitely reject this specific piece of legislation.
And like you said, they're trying to have the best of both worlds so they can calm down their base and, Republican populists on the other side saying, look, guys, we're handling it, but also it doesn't really do much of anything. It's like when Warren Buffett, for example, and the rest of them will say, of course, I think we should raise federal income taxes. Of course, we need more taxes. And of course, what he means by that is for him and his, specifics with all the loopholes and the fancy lawyers that someone like him would have, his taxes would go up 0.000001%. So no skin off his nose to look like, Mr. Philanthropist or something. And yet, the rest of us, we'd be the ones in the middle class actually carrying that burden by seeing, real percentage points going up. So that's what they like to do here. And just lastly, before I let you go tonight, because it was so funny to hear Nancy Pelosi today with her little comment about Governor DeSantis and what we've seen with Martha's Vineyard, with some of these, illegal immigrants being shipped here and there. It reminds me, I guess I won't say names, but there was a CNN regular that I had a chance to meet in my community college a few years back. He spoke at my college, and afterward I was kind of grilling him. I kind of got kicked out after. I guess I asked too many questions. They told me that actually. But one of the things we're talking about with immigration, he had a girl on the side who was talking to him, and she was saying, all these Republicans, it was 2016, Trump the wall. So that was the political climate at the time. She's like, these Republicans, they don't understand that if they were to get strict on the border, that their avocado prices would go up. They'd have to pay more for the people working in the fields and the farms and picking the fruits and vegetables. She said, aren't they so silly? They don't understand that. And the CNN commentator, I kid you not, he looks at her and he completely agrees. And so I call him out saying, so you want to exploit slave labor? Is that what you're doing here? I got kicked out, but Pelosi, your response to her?
I mean, it just goes to show sometimes the truth does get out, and they have Freudian slips. And, this is how they view most immigrants. They view them as cheap labor to replace American labor, to pay basically slave wages to, and how they can be exploited. But they never say their true intents, just like you mentioned with Warren Buffett. They always virtue signal, and they always self-project, and they go out and they say, we're doing this because we care. We're doing this because we're noble, because we are moral people. But it's always a lie. It's always coming from a place where they want to be exploitative, and they want to take advantage of others, and they want to advance their own corruption. And this is no different. But I will say on the price of avocados, this is a very important phenomenon, because the higher the price of avocados, more Karens and middle-class suburban women are going to be outraged. You can actually trace suburban outrage to the price of avocados. You can't get your avocado toast. People are going to be very upset.
That's funny, Gavin. And on that note, I'll have to let you go tonight. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.